Good evening, everyone. I'm Lauren Macomb, the Director of Production in Publishing here at the Art Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this program on how the museum crafted its first catalog on Egyptian art in over 100 years. As a member of the publishing department, I've had the privilege of helping to shape our digital publishing program over the past 15 years. And this project has been a unique opportunity to share our institutional expertise and knowledge about these remarkable objects with a global audience. And as you will learn, it has also been an important step in transforming our digital publishing program. As we begin tonight, this is just a reminder to please silence your mobile devices. It's my pleasure to introduce the speakers for this evening's program, Ashley Arico and Katie Reilly. Ashley serves as the Art Institute's Associate Curator of Ancient Egyptian Art in the Arts of Africa. Prior to joining the Art Institute, she completed archaeological fieldwork at the Temple of the Goddess Mut at Karnak and held positions at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Walters Art Museum, and the Johns Hopkins Archaeological Museum. Arico received her PhD in Near Eastern Studies with a focus on ancient Egyptian art and archaeology from the Johns Hopkins University, where her research examined Egyptian stone statuary excavated in the Levant as the evidence for interactions across borders during antiquity. Current and recent projects include the digital catalog we're discussing today, and a study exploring the intersection of art and writing production in the late first millennium BCE Egypt. Her research interests include object biographical studies of ancient Egyptian artifacts, the history of collecting ancient Egyptian art in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and approaches to presenting ancient collections in modern museum settings. Katie has been the Associate VP of Publishing at the Art Institute of Chicago since 2023. She previously held positions as the Deputy Director for Digital Resources and Content Strategy at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the Director of Publications, Graphics, and Photographic Services at the Carnegie Museum of Art. As a co-founder of the Museum Publishing Digital Interest Group, alongside myself, and current Secretary of the Museum Computer Network, she's thrilled to continue the Art Institute's strong legacy of digital scholarly publications alongside print publications for specialist and popular audiences. Now, without further delay, please join me in welcoming Ashley and Katie.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Lauren, and for all of your contributions to this publication project that we're going to be talking about today. And thanks to all of you here in the room also for joining us tonight for this conversation about telling the stories of ancient Egyptian art. So the new open access digital catalog, Ancient Egyptian Art at the Art Institute of Chicago, launched on the museum's website last June. And as Lauren mentioned, this was a pretty big undertaking and a long time coming. It had been over 100 years since we had a catalog of the collection. As Katie will discuss later, it really takes a village to produce a product like this one that so beautifully showcases the artworks in our collection. And so I'm really delighted that Katie was available and interested in joining me tonight to share some of these less seen aspects that go into publishing our collection here at the Art Institute. So diving into the content of the catalog for a second, one of the core stories that we wanted to highlight in this new publication is really a Chicago story. And that's the story of how the Art Institute's ancient Egyptian collection developed over the course of more than 100 years, and also the role that it helped play in positioning Chicago as really a center for studying Egyptology here in the United States. This tale is beautifully told in the introductory essay that you see here by Egyptologist Emily Teeter, who has researched the collection on and off for decades and who was the primary author of this new book. So our story starts in 1890 when Amelia B. Edwards, who was an author and also the co-founder of the British archaeological organization known then as the Egypt Exploration Fund, visited Chicago, actually the Art Institute, on a speaker's tour and gifted the Art Institute its first Egyptian antiquity, which is this ushabti of a man named Hor-Uja, who lived around 350 BCE. Excavated by the fund, this was one of hundreds of similar figures designed to perform agricultural labor on Hor-Uja's behalf in the afterlife. If you look closely, you'll be able to see the pick and the hoe that he holds in his hands, all ready to go work in the fields when the spell that's written across his lower body in hieroglyphs is activated. So with this gift of a ushabti, the Art Institute became the first museum in Chicago to start collecting Egyptian artifacts. It was soon followed by the Columbian Museum of Chicago, now the Field Museum, in 1893, and the University of Chicago in 1894, where objects were displayed first in the Haskell Museum, and now are displayed in the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures Museum. And you can see some archival images of how those collections used to look. So here at the Art Institute, and really Chicago more broadly during this time period, the two kind of driving forces in building a collection were the two men that you see up on the screen here. So on the left, we have Charles L. Hutchinson, who was the then president of the Art Institute, and on the right, James Henry Breasted, who was professor of Egyptology at the University of Chicago. They teamed up to form a Chicago chapter of the Egypt Exploration Fund, and were really interested in bringing antiquities here to the city. And in fact, it's the two of them that are responsible for selecting or acquiring most of the artworks that now make up the bulk of our Egyptian collection. And you can kind of trace some of this collection building through Emily's essay, but I'll just start here with these three objects, which were the result of the first trip of 3 that Hutchinson took to Egypt, this one in 1892, along with museum trustee Martin Ryerson, to acquire objects on the museum's behalf. So from this one trip, they returned with 232 objects. So our collection went from 1 to 232, which represented a broad, or over 232, which represented a broad scope of Egyptian art and artifact types. So here, as just a sample, you can see on the left the wooden ushabti of a man named Nebseni, the colorfully painted commemorative stela of a man named Amenemhat and his mother Yatu, and the canopic jars of a man named Amenhotep. And all of these objects have entries in the new catalog, and particularly the canopic jar, keep in mind, because we'll return to it a little bit later in the evening. So one of the really great things about this introductory essay for me, especially as somebody who's interested in the history of collecting and displaying ancient Egyptian art, is that since it was in a digital format, we were able to share a lot of high-res images of how the Egyptian collection has looked here at the Art Institute over the years. So starting here with room 32, which is more or less upstairs from where we are now, in the 1890s, not long after Hutchinson returned from actually the second of his collecting trips, where you can see lots and lots of Egyptian antiquities displayed typologically in space. By the 1920s, we have kind of a more open, airy room with lovely windows. This is room 10, so essentially, I think more or less where you buy your tickets to if you come in Michigan Avenue now. Again, with some of our favorite pieces displayed, the coffins, and if you look back in the back left corner, you'll see that round-topped stela of Amenemhat that I was talking about a minute ago. And these views might look familiar to many of you who are longtime Art Institute visitors. This is the display of the Egyptian collection that was in McKinlock Court as part of the Ancient Galleries from 1994 to 2012. So at that time, the collection came down, and I will also say on a personal note, in the intervening years, or not too long after that, in 2017, I was hired as the first Egyptologist at the museum. So we'd had a collection by that point for over 100 years, but the first person to really focus on studying this collection. And also at that time, which will become significant for what we're talking about tonight, the museum had already asked Dr. Teeter to start writing a catalog of the collection. So that was actually one of my first projects when I arrived here, was to start editing that catalog, which was not published at that time, obviously. Okay, there we go. And that brings us to 2022, which is when our new and current Gallery of Ancient Egyptian Art opened in Gallery 50. So here you see two views, which hopefully look somewhat familiar to you here in the room. And this was a really great opportunity as we were preparing for this gallery. A lot of work goes into putting artworks on view. So we were doing a lot of new photography, we were doing conservation treatments, we were doing scientific study. And so this seemed like a really great moment to revisit the publishing project, so the manuscript that already existed. At that time, the Art Institute only really had two Art Institute publications of the Egyptian collection. One was the book that you see on the left, which is a handbook of the collection, which was published in 1923. This book was pretty comprehensive. It included all the objects, more or less, that were in the collection at that time, but often relatively briefly, so maybe only a sentence or a half sentence. And of course, in the last 100 years, scholarship has progressed a fair amount. A selection of objects were included in a special edition of Museum Studies, which was the Art Institute of Chicago's journal in the 1990s. But other than that, that's kind of where things stood on the publishing front. So with the opening of the new gallery, we started to become more regularly in conversations with our colleagues in publishing to kind of start aspirationally imagining what a new catalog of the collection for a new generation might look like. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Katie.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. So I'm speaking here to a history that is before my time, although Lauren, who introduced us, was here. We were trying to kind of reconstruct what the steps were from that 2017 manuscript to, you might wonder, why did it take 9 years or 8 years to get here? But it really was a moment, as she said, that moment in kind of 2019 is a really key moment for us in publishing. After Ashley had been here in the museum for a couple of years, that was when conversations sort of started to pick up in advance of that opening. And it really was the recommendation at that time that the book that had maybe probably been envisioned as being a print publication made a lot more sense as a digital one. So why did we think that? Why did we think it was a good candidate? This is not covering the entirety of the Egyptian collection, but it's a significant amount. So as you can see, some stats up here. There are 92 objects, entries that are included, covering 111 objects. There are 3 essays. That adds up to 100,000 words and 525 images. If you just think about how many 525 images might result in a print book. The digital format would allow us to present multiple views of things, to present more dynamic views of things, include video. And essentially in talking about this, a book that we produced, if it were print, would be extremely long and expensive. And one of the things that was really important for this was access, was making sure that this content was going to be available to the group of researchers and students that was our target, and available globally to scholars around the world who might not. Distribution networks for books can be uneven, and the fact that this is free and open access, we thought would help make it more available. We also were really well equipped to do this. The Art Institute has a long history and has long been a leader in the field of digital publishing. We were one of the first participants in something called the Getty Online Scholarly Catalog Initiative, which is called OSCE because that's quite a mouthful. And that was funded by the Getty starting in 2009, expressly to kind of address some of the problems that I talked about with systematic catalogs being extremely expensive to produce for kind of specialized scholarly audiences. And a number of museums worked on kind of developing their own platforms. It was sort of an incubator for creating new ways to present this content. So we had, and to break down some of the barriers that existed at that time, scholars being concerned about how real digital publications were. There was still some resistance to, is this still going to be here next year, or will this die, or the platform break? So we had published our first online scholarly catalog coming out of that program, Monet Paintings and Drawings, in 2014. And by 2019, Lauren and the crew in publishing had already published 14 digital catalogs. So today we are up to 23, including Egyptian. But that's kind of where we were at that point. And just a note on these early catalogs, because this is kind of where this is kind of an important moment in our maturity. These first catalogs had features that were really important and valuable to scholars. Included things like layered image viewers, so that you could toggle between views, say, of a kind of a normal light picture of a painting and see the underdrawing in X-ray or UV, or in IR. It had abilities to do citations, zoomable images, dynamic footnotes. So it had a lot of things that were really appealing. As you'll also kind of note, it mimics a little bit a print book format, like a page format, which again was kind of part of trying to get people over the hump of resistance to this and present it to them in a way that they felt comfortable consuming it. And around this time, kind of 5 years into or more than 5 years in, but 5 years past the first publication by the Art Institute, they participated in a digital catalog study with the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where I was at the time, so I got to work with Lauren on this, Getty Publications, and the National Gallery of Art. And we did focus groups, we did surveying, we had all of our publications had very different formats. So we were able to really learn about what people found appealing in different formats across the options. And it reinforced for us, all of us happily, that people were really finding a great amount of value in all of our publications. It allowed us to identify some features that were particularly possible, that were particularly popular. But it also pointed to some things that we could just see how not only technology had moved along, but also people's willingness to kind of read long format scholarship had moved along. So we had some kind of recommendations there on how to better structure, write, kind of link to digital publications to make them easier to use. We also, we knew that they found some of the navigation challenging, but also some of our concerns were based on things that we all already knew, that Art Institute already knew. This kind of book-like format that you see, this is our Kayabot digital catalog in the original format. These catalogs, because of this fixed format, were not responsive. They were not mobile friendly. So I don't know if you can see it, but this little thing is my equivalent, mimicking what that looks like if you tried to look at it on your phone. And you just get, there's a strip of text that runs down the middle and a notice that says, for the best experience, please use a browser or device larger than 124 pixels, i.e. iPad size. And while most people are reading this on a desktop, we really kind of wanted to get with the times. It was also just a complicated platform. It was difficult to build and maintain. It was built on a different platform than our museum website. So we made, they made the choice at that time to invest in creating a new platform. This was all happening in around 2019 after they did the study. And the first publication that was launched in this new platform was Malangatana Modern in 2021, which features a responsive design. It's integrated with the museum website, which I'll kind of touch upon the kind of consequences of that later. Much easier to build and maintain, and really does a better job of encouraging exploration within the publication itself. And as you can see, it is mobile friendly. That is what it looks like on your phone. So with kind of all of that work happening on the publishing side, everybody was very excited about the Egyptian catalog being the first object-based catalog to be in this new platform. And while there had been a lot of work that went kind of into the preparation for this, as Ashley mentioned, photography and other things were happening in advance of the reinstallation of the galleries. There still was a lot of work that needed to be done to kind of put together the team to work on the publication itself. So beyond just publishing and curatorial, we work very closely with the team in experience design, who maintains our website, conservation and science, which Ashley has also mentioned, and with our imaging team. I love this shot of one of the objects in the catalog in our imaging studios. And just to kind of give you a sense of what it takes to make a really rigorous scholarly catalog, kind of taking you through the timeline. So we sort of talked about 2019 being this moment where we were doing the catalog study, figuring out what we wanted to do with the platform. December 2022 was really when things sort of kicked off in earnest. That's like the first time I could find the first schedule for the catalog that we were able to find, where it really became real. That's when we, commissioned, in addition to Emily Teeter's texts, commissioned a new, the sort of preface by I'm totally blanking, but by Fatma Ismail. That was really important for us to include. She was an Egyptian Egyptologist that offered a foreword to the book, which was wonderful. Then kind of moving into July of 2023, that was when we had a peer reviewer. We're continuing to do new photography. Our digital production coordinator, Armando Roman, who did a huge job in doing this, started to prepare things, and he started really doing the build of the catalog in September of 2024. And then even after that, there's many rounds of back and forth, as Ashley can attest, of reviewing things in layouts, doing lots of troubleshooting. Because this was the first catalog that we were doing that was entry-based in this platform, we had to figure out so much as we went along and create documentation for what we were doing. And Ashley was an incredibly patient and gracious guinea pig as we went on this journey together. So, and then that leads us to June of 2025, launch, when we were all able to really celebrate the fruits of all of that labor. So with that, I'll pass it back to Ashley to share some of the really great stories that you can explore in the catalog.
Thanks for that additional background on digital publishing, Katie, and for being so supportive of all of my difficult questions, like can we incorporate hieroglyphs into this? Not super common for other areas of the collection. So now we're going to dive into some of the content of the catalog, this catalog in particular, where each object kind of has its own story, whether that's a story of scientific discoveries or archaeological or collecting history, or just interesting art historical inquiry. As Katie mentioned, the catalog includes 92 entries for 111 objects, and these entries are divided into 12 sections by object type, with these beautiful tiles that you can click on to get to the entries themselves. Within each of the sections, the entries are arranged from oldest object to newest object, and our hope was that this would make it really accessible for all readers, regardless of their background with Egyptian art and history, whether they were professional Egyptologists or people that were kind of coming to the topic for the first time. So one of the great things about the digital format of this catalog is that we were able to highlight even the smallest artworks in our collection, like Catalog 73, which is a gold amulet of the god Nehebkau, which only measures about 3/4 of an inch. So the image you just saw of it on the screen, where it was several feet tall, really gives you an idea of the importance of having this really high-res photography on the website that we can view. This is the basic way that an entry is arranged, and you can see also a nice feature over on the left is that all of these entries are downloadable, so the website will PDF them if you want them in a different format, which I'll return to in a little bit. So returning to the canopic jars of Amenhotep, which were, of course, collected by Hutchinson in 1892. Amenhotep was the overseer of the builders of Amen at Karnak, so in modern Luxor, and he lived there around 1400 BCE. Canopic jars are designed to hold the embalmed stomach, lungs, liver, and intestines of the deceased, which are removed during the mummification process. And this particular set of jars has hieroglyphic inscriptions on the outside that name Amenhotep as the owner of the jar, and also record a promise of a goddess to protect the jar's contents. So each jar is assigned to a different goddess, from left to right here on the screen, Serket, Neith, Isis, and Nephthys, and keep that in mind for a few minutes from now. So these basic facts about this set of canopic jars were already included in the 1923 catalog that was written by Thomas George Allen, which until last year was the most comprehensive of our Egyptian publications. The entry included a black and white photograph and about a 2-paragraph description. So this was a pretty long entry for that catalog. And we've been able to improve a lot upon this in the new catalog. In addition to adding color photography in high resolution, we also wanted to make sure that this digital catalog was more robust and dynamic. When we decided to go digital, it was really important, I think, to all of us in publishing and in curatorial, that we make as much use of the digital functionalities, capabilities as possible. So for example, this entry provides 360-degree views of the objects, which you can spin yourself. So you can go and move the canopic jar back and forth and find the exact angle you want or look at the specific detail you're interested in. In this entry, we chose, among other things, to kind of highlight a story of scientific discovery. So here what you're looking at are 2 images of the same jar lid side by side, one in natural light and one using an imaging technique called visible induced luminescence. This technique is used to identify the presence of Egyptian blue, which is probably the world's first synthetic pigment. So anywhere on the image on the right that you see the glowing bright white, that means that Egyptian blue is present. Our colleagues in conservation and science were able to identify concentrations of Egyptian blue in the whites of the eyes, which hopefully is clear to all of you, which is interesting because they don't visibly appear blue when you look at them in person. So this gives us insight into how ancient Egyptian artists were mixing their pigments and thinking about their artwork. So perhaps they felt that the addition of blue to white produced a brighter appearance. And this is something that's visible on all of the canopic jars. I just really enjoy this image of all of them lined up together with their little glowing white eyes. It's something quite charming about it. Now, since we had the capacity to do so much more in terms of imaging than we had in any of our previous print catalogs, we were also able to highlight and provide views of objects that are rarely seen by the human eye, even by us as curators. So here what you're looking at is the inner rim of each of the 4 jar lids. And if you look closely, you'll see each has some writing on it, which I understand many of you probably won't be able to read, but what's written there is the name of a goddess written in black ink. So these are the names of the same goddesses that were invoked on the front of the jars that I talked about earlier, Serket, Neith, Nephthys, and Isis. So essentially, this is an ancient Egyptian cheat sheet to make sure that the correct lid goes on the correct jar. And I really enjoy this element of these objects just because it's such a human element, and it's also quite practical. I will admit, when I'm installing these in the gallery, this is sometimes how I make sure that we have everything arranged correctly before we close up the case. Some of the other objects like this one, tell stories of archaeological context. So this is actually 2 objects from our collection. They come from a chapel that was once in 3 parts, belonging to a woman named Meret Teti-Iet. So here we have the left and the right portions. When the full chapel was assembled, they would have been facing each other. Meret Teti-Iet lived around 2050 BCE, and the purpose of this chapel was for her to receive funerary offerings to provide for her in the afterlife. So on each of the panels, you see her seated on the bottom in front of a table of offerings, and then the registers above show people bringing her goods and offerings she might need in the afterlife, or the types of things that she's interested in. So if you look in the upper right corner on the panel on the right, you'll see she's asking for a lovely necklace and some eye makeup. Now, these pieces are a rare example, at least for our collection, of objects with an excavated context. We know that they were excavated by the British Egyptologist archaeologist James Quibell at the site of Saqqara, which is famous for the Step Pyramid of Djoser, for those of you who are Egypt aficionados, in his 1906-1907 season. So because we were able to include more images, we could include the archival images from the excavation, which show that at least the panel on the right was more complete when it was found. And we were also able to provide contextual images of the other missing portions. So I said this was a 3-part chapel. The central part of the chapel, or what's known as a false door, which is kind of a permeable place between the world of the living and the world of the dead, is now in the Egyptian Art Museum in Munich. So our colleagues kindly gave us the image here so that you can see what all 3 pieces look like. If you look along the bottom, you'll see images of Merit Tetiet herself walking from the outside in towards the center of the doorway, which, when the whole thing is assembled, continues on to the panels we have. So these are the sides of the 2 objects in our collection, where she also is shown walking on the bottom. So again, being able to have the capacity to have a lot of images was really, really important. In designing the catalog, we also wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to make the catalog kind of speak with itself and link around. So here you see me scrolling through an entry and clicking on the name of Merit Tetiet. And this will lead you to one of the appendices that we made, which is a list of all of the Egyptian names that are written on objects in the collection, written in kind of a standardized hieroglyphic font, so that you can try your hand at looking at the objects. So here we come to Merit Tetiet here. Her name is written differently on the 2 objects. And if we click on the link back to the object, we can go back and blow up the image and look for that text, which is at the end of the hieroglyphic line on the right. We also used these interactive capabilities when we were dealing with the maps. So we made a layered map where you can switch between the names of the various cities of Egypt in different periods. So you can look at the ancient Egyptian like we have here, the modern English and Arabic, or even the ancient Greek. And these are for all the places that we know are associated with objects from our collection, like Saqqara, which we were just talking about, or down here in the zoomed in portion, Luxor, which is the area where our next object comes from. This is the cartonnage coffin or mummy case of a man named Pa'ankh-Amen that still contains his mummified body. So Pa'ankh-Amen lived around 900 BCE in what is today Luxor. And we know from the text on his coffin that he, like his father before him, was a doorkeeper in the temple of Amun at Karnak. So here, for this entry, we wanted to kind of go through all of the really packed imagery and iconography on the coffin to kind of give you a sense of how an ancient Egyptian looking at it would have understood and interpreted some of this information. So I mentioned earlier when we were looking at that tiny little gold amulet that one of the great features of the catalog is that you can create PDFs of any of the entries or essays. And if you were to do that with Catalog 99, which is the coffin of Pa'ankh-Amen, this is what it would look like. And so this just gives you a sense, again, of how this new design allowed us to kind of walk through an object, show individual shots of different views or details, and kind of talk through what the significance of these things were. So for example, these are just some images that I took out of the catalog. On the right, we see Pa'ankh-Amen walking hand in hand with Horus, who is introducing the deceased to Osiris, the ruler of the underworld, and the goddesses Isis and Nephthys. And the hieroglyphic text above his head is where we get his name and other identifying information. On the upper left, you'll see an image of a winged scarab pushing a sun disk. This is a imagery for the ancient Egyptians that kind of evoked rebirth, which was very important in a funerary context. In the bottom middle, you see a really lovely detail from the chest area of the coffin that shows the goddess Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice, with the little feather on her head. And in the lower left, you can see an image of the back of the coffin, which is covered pretty much along its length with an image of a jed pillar. Now, returning to the entry itself, another great linked feature in this is that we were able to define Egyptological terms like uraeus, white crown, ankh, or jed. So if you didn't know what a jed pillar was, you could click on the link here. It will take you to the glossary. Again, you can scroll through and find it and see if it's something that has a hieroglyph, maybe even an image of what the symbol looks like, and a concise definition of how we're using it, particularly in this catalog. And I've been told that the glossary is one of the most visited pages in the catalog, which is really great to know that people are looking at it. And for more on how we know those statistics, I'll turn things back to Katie.
I love it, even though we've lived with this catalog for years. I always find new things when Ashley starts talking about it. So the catalog has been out in the world for almost a year. And because this is a digital publication, we can know way more about how people are using it and where they're coming from than we could ever know for a print publication. For instance, we know we've reached over 3,000 individual users in 37 countries. And we know that they're exploring multiple pages when they visit and that they're coming back to the publication multiple times, which for us seems good. People are satisfied and coming back for more. And the average visitor is spending about 5.5 minutes on the site, which is significantly higher than the sort of industry standard of 2 to 4 minutes being a sort of high engagement. This heat map shows us where visitors are coming from. And as you can see, the US and UK are at the top, which is kind of typical for our publications. But usually Egypt is not in the top 3. And so that tells us that we are reaching that important target audience of Egyptian researchers and scholars. You'll also see that Spain is pretty high up, number 4, and I'll get back to that for a moment to kind of be puzzled at that until we figured out why. Because we can see from the data how people are getting to us. Mostly they're doing a search on a search engine like Google or Bing. Here I searched on Google yesterday and did Art Institute Egypt, and it came up as the number 3 hit. This solved the mystery of the high Spanish numbers. This is a page from an archaeological society of Egyptologists in Spain. They did a lovely sort of feature on the catalog in their newsletter that's on their website last August and saw a big bump and have continued to, people must have bookmarked it because we're continuing to see traffic. We also, and I mentioned this earlier, one of the big advantages of us building these catalogs now within the platform that we use for our website is that we can integrate the website, the catalog content throughout the site. So this is actually the object page, object entry for this particular object. And you can see that there's a link on the sidebar that will take you directly to the entry within the digital catalog for that. So if you're casually interested and have come across this, then and you want to know more, you can do that really seamlessly. And then also just a little plug for our landing page for our publications, arctic.edu publications. You can have find links there to all of our 23 digital catalogs, as well as information about our print catalogs that are available and links to find them in the shop. So people might also come to us for doing searches there. And this is just kind of reiterating a little bit. You can see here, Google, Bing, that third one that says, can't see what it says, AE is the Spanish site. And I also just find this interesting that you'll see the number 4 way that people are coming to us is ChatGPT. This is a reality, and I'm sure that we will see that continuing to grow over time as people kind of use that as their default search engine. And how does this compare with our other publications? So here is kind of all of our digital publications. This is showing stats from 2021 through 2026. This is where we have kind of reliable data. It gets a little bit murky before that. And you'll see that the Ancient Egyptian Catalog, which I've marked here with the arrow, is number 3, hot on the heels of Monet Paintings and Drawings and another publication called Perspectives on Data. And which is pretty remarkable given that that this goes back to 2021 and Egypt has only been around for a year. So these other catalogs have way more potential time to have been viewed. So we'll see if Egyptian continues to sort of creep up in the standings. And I'll end here on a quick note on the future. We are so blessed to have a very active research program here at the Art Institute. Since we published the Egyptian catalog, we published a digital catalog on our collection of Cézanne paintings and watercolors just earlier this year. We have 4 more publications that are, scheduled and are in active development right now, and have ongoing conversations with our colleagues in a number of other departments who are interested. But we're really grateful, again, for how this particular publication helped pave the way for all of that work. And for Ashley, as I said, for being such a willing partner in the experimentation as we worked out all of these new technologies. All of them have benefited from having such a great team on this one. So that's the end of our formal presentation. If you want to explore the Egyptian catalog yourself further on your mobile device, since it is optimized to do so, just scan the QR code and you'll pull it up. And then we'll stop here and take any questions that you have. Thank you.
Question up at the top here.
Hello, good evening. I have a two-part question, and the first part of it is, what observable difference have you seen while you're working with other museums throughout the world as far as the exchange of not just the data component, but the actual, I should say, contextual, like ideas and all of those kinds of things? The second piece is, with this particular type of art, there's so much debate now about repatriation. Has this changed that debate at all? Because now we're able, in a three-dimensional manner, to exchange art openly. And I guess those would be the two questions.
I guess I can take the second one at least. That's a good question. It's interesting to see how, as more and more people share their information about their collections digitally, how that will affect repatriation questions. I will say for the Egyptian collection specifically here, I think the Egyptians and the Egyptian government are very happy to have the pieces here and on display, and that's why, as Katie said, it was so important to us to have an Egyptian voice represented in the catalog.
For your first question about sort of partnerships or exchange, or could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't very clear, and I'm losing my voice, which is not helping. I think what I'm trying to say is, understanding from an academic standpoint, what you're doing is very unique, and it's very important because it's preserving not just the art itself, but the knowledge around it. So the exchange of that, like how have you seen that to impact the art institute in a positive way, I guess is a better way to ask.
I think it is a huge benefit. Especially speaking on just the publishing front, something like the digital catalog study that we went through, what I partnered with Lauren on before I was even here, is something that we're all very keenly interested in doing and trying to learn from each other and not reinvent the wheel. There are a number of really interesting groups that are working on things like linked data, where you can have more of these like controlled vocabularies, so that there are ways that you can more easily kind of exchange information and compare apples to apples that lots of museums are working on, and a technology called IIIF that is creates sort of it's a interoperable kind of image file type that again would allow you in certain functionalities to be able to just pull an image that somebody has published on their site or in another digital publication and kind of seamlessly integrate it into yours. So I think that there are a lot of things that people are doing to really take advantage of digital technologies to make things to encourage collaboration. And Ashley could speak more to how the scholars themselves are taking advantage of that, but that's how we as publishers are thinking about enabling that.
Yeah, I will say, at least for the Egyptian collection here at the Art Institute, since it's a collection that hadn't really been published in over 100 years, it's not a collection that's super well known. So I think the real benefit is that now you see other scholars finding the entries, making connections between pieces, that are in other collections. So we hope that that will only continue to grow as the information kind of gets disseminated more and more in this easily accessible format. See one over here for Miguel, maybe? Can you hear me? Oh, yep. He's bringing you a microphone. Yeah.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for all the work that you did. I think that's amazing. I have a question about the doorkeeper's coffin that contains the mummy. Have you ever opened it? Has the mummy been seen? Would you ever display it?
So if you go into the gallery right now, you'll see that this object is on display in its own kind of separate area, because we wanted to be respectful of the fact that Ankh-An Amen is still inside of his coffin. We have never opened the coffin, and that's partly by design on the part of the ancient Egyptians. So the coffin itself is made out of a material called cartonnage, which is kind of like paper mache, and it was like completely wrapped around his mummified body and then painted. So there's no way to remove the body without damaging the coffin. And that's partly a reflection of, what was going on during his time, namely that there was a big practice of coffin reuse. So when coffins were made of wood, it was very easy to go and take one out of a tomb, add your name to it, and then reuse it, and then the person who it had originally been for lost access to it. So this was kind of we think, a way to fight against that. He has, however, been X-rayed and CT scanned, so we can learn more about him as a person, at least in terms of what his body preserves, in that way. And some of that is talked about in the catalog entry. Yeah, down in the front here, George.
How did you choose which objects to show, and of the hundreds more that you have, or are you going to expand the catalog at some future point in time and include more?
I mean, that would be great. We always like to include more. And Lauren was just telling me earlier, like, in part because of how well this has gone, more Egyptian objects are popping up in some of the more broad-reaching books about the Art Institute's collection. But at present, we don't have plans to do a part 2. The initial object list was actually made by one of my predecessors, Mary Carol Groyle, who used to oversee the Egyptian collection and sadly passed away. And then when I arrived, I went through the list. We mostly kept the same list. I added some things. I took some things away. But our main goal was to try to provide a representative sample of the different types of objects that we had, and to also try to cover the breadth of Egyptian history. So there's 3,000 years worth of art in this book. That was, I think, kind of our motivation. But there are always more objects that can be added. I think the publishing team would have had some serious...
Did you see that list of all the other books we're working on right now?
Yeah.
We have a question up here.
Yeah.
If you could add 1 or 2 more things to the website, do you have things in mind that you would want to add to it?
Oh, that's such a hard question. I mean, the one great thing about our website is that every object in the collection does have its own page. So even if it's not in the catalog with this super in-depth treatment, you can visit the object page, often see multiple views with images that are freely downloadable and usable, often with a description. So even if it's not in the catalog, it's not the end of the world. But yes, there are a number of things that I would like to include. We have some more relief fragments from chapels, like the Chapel of Meretediet, that I think are really interesting. And also I have a number of projects I'm working on right now with colleagues, for example, in conservation, to kind of study a cylinder seal in our collection. So there's always new things that we're learning about the collection.
It sounds like a lot. Thanks again. It was really excellent. It sounds like a lot of thought and work went into creating the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure for this. Is that something that you share? Is it open source? Is it something that you hope to expand? I mean, obviously it sounded like you hope to expand into your other collections, but is it something that you'd share with other museums? I guess that's my first question, if I can double dip.
Sure. So the platform that we have an amazing digital experience team that is very active within the museum digital community, shares out at conferences. Nikhil Trivedi, who is the senior developer, who really kind of he and his team oversaw the redevelopment of this, and oversee the development of the whole website, have really championed opening up our code, opening up our kind of API so that other museums can kind of benefit from it. We do have a kind of bespoke publishing platform that has just developed over time to meet our particular needs, because museum websites are really complicated because they need to integrate ticketing software and collections management systems for, and figure out how to publish those. So every museum kind of will do their own thing. And so really it's kind of for every museum to think about like what is their existing digital stack and their expertise, and then try to build that out. So part of why they made the decision to go from the kind of OSCE toolkit platform that was the early one was like literally the developer who had been really involved in it, like left the museum. And I mean, that was part of it in addition to other things. And there wasn't the in-house expertise to keep up with it, even if and also, some things were going obsolete just in terms of the platform. So it was like, if we want to make sure that these publications are going to be available forever and will not be left behind, let's build it in the same thing that our website is built in, because we're never going to leave our website behind. It's sort of like ensuring that for us in publishing that like we're always going to be on there, and because there's a long history of micro exhibition, what microsites that are not supported or other things like that. So anyway, yeah, I mean, we share all of those things really freely, but it's not something like a plug and play that somebody else could just do this exactly the same way.
And I guess my other question, if that's all right, this might be painfully naive, I'm sorry. I was thinking about a talk that I went to some time ago, not here, but just elsewhere, about Native American art, and how that's one of the areas in which it sort of feels like the average person tends to forget that there are like living Native American people, and it's not just something that happened a long time ago. And I feel like maybe Egyptianology is like that, in the sense that people are like, oh yeah, this cool stuff happened in BCE, but obviously Egypt, it's a country and with the people and lots of artists. So do you have any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, modern Egyptians are very, very proud of their cultural heritage. I mean, if you've seen any of the news coverage around the opening of the Grand Egyptian Museum last year, you'll see like really how important this is to them today. I will say, I mean, and of course everybody has different views, but like most of the people that I talk to have a lot of pride in having their objects in museums around the world, and that you can go pretty much anywhere and see Egyptian objects and learn about ancient Egypt. So we feel very privileged here to be able to kind of provide that experience.
Our next question right here.
Yeah.
That was really cool. I'm excited to explore the site. But for big objects like the sarcophagus, how do you photograph like the back of it?
Yes, we have an amazing team of photographers here at the Art Institute, and it's one thing I think when you're reading a book that's really hard to comprehend without having the objects in front of you. Like some of these things are like the amulet that's this big, which is really hard to photograph, and some of them are like over life size, which is also really hard to photograph. So for the coffins, it's often like a multi-day shoot, and it takes a whole team of photographers and curators and art handlers to make sure, and even conservators, to make sure that the objects are moved in a way that's safe, to kind of, so often we'll like, maybe put them down on essentially like pillow-like material and kind of rotate them and shore them up on one side. But it's, yeah, really difficult because you can't just flip it over. So some things get photographed standing. a lot of conversation goes into the planning for a lot of these objects. So again, kind of reinforcing what Katie and I think both said, that like, it really takes a lot of people to produce something like this.
We have our next question right here.
Yep.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was very engaging. Would you guys ever include like 3D scans or 3D models of different objects within your catalog?
That is so funny. And I was just talking with Michael and Bonnie about this the other day. Have we had actual models in? Here, Lauren can feed me the answer to this one in a catalog. Have we had one yet? Yes. Yes, so this is something that we have done. Our imaging department, which actually reports to me as well, has done. They regularly do 360 views, like some of the ones that we showed, and photogrammetry. They most recently have done that to create touchable, like 3D models, like touchable things in collaboration with the Ryan Learning Center for people with low vision, so that they're able to actually experience objects. And our experience design team has oftentimes used like 3D modeling in order to create things like animations for digital interactives. So it's something, and way back in the day, our head of digital at the time had done a kind of a pilot of a number of those that were then attached to object records. This was like in the heyday of when everybody was getting 3D printers and like maker spaces were a big thing, so that you could actually just download it and 3D print your own, little amulet or whatever had been scanned. So it's something that we have the capability to do and have kind of done it in a sporadic way, but not in a super strategic way. So it really would just be like, wherever this is going to benefit you and give you a way to experience or understand something about the object that you couldn't get from photography alone, is when we would do it.
We have time for one final question.
Hi. Besides the objects you already mentioned, what are some of your favorite objects in the collection that are kind of like unusual?
Oh, that's so hard. Asking a curator to pick their favorite object is very cruel. There are a couple in the catalog that I really enjoy. One is another stela of a man named Menemhat and his wife Hemet. It's a rectangular limestone stela that's really vibrantly painted. So I really like that one, not only because it's interesting to see the interplay between the hieroglyphic text and the images, but also because it gives you a sense of like what Egyptian art really would have looked like in ancient times, namely that most things were much more colorful than we see them today. There's also a really great object that we call an ostracon, which is essentially a flake of limestone that was left over after they were carving the rock-cut tombs in Thebes. And it was reused by an artist to kind of draw a sketch of a king. So I also really enjoy that drawing just because it's giving you insight kind of into how Egyptian artists are working and like what Egyptian people are doing. So, but there's a lot of really fun stories to discover in the catalog and in the gallery. So, yeah. And with that, I think I'm getting a thumbs up from Miguel, so I think we'll go ahead and close it. But thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you, Katie.